Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, we're excited to welcome this esteemed delegation to be discussing basically the fate of Palestinians, and more specifically, those Palestinian citizens of Israel in the shadows of a democratic movement sweeping North Africa and percolating in the Gulf. I'll give a brief introduction about this subject, and then I'll give the floor to Mr. Jafar Farah of Mossawa, and then we'll open up for Q&A with the rest of the panelists who are here and who I'll also introduce. Since its establishment as a Jewish and democratic state, Israel has struggled to maintain two seemingly irreconcilable characters. On the one hand, it seeks to be a state for all its citizens, and on the other, it seeks to be a homeland for the Jewish people globally. How can Israel uphold both goals, and how has it fared thus far? Structurally, the state has set up the institutional framework for a robust liberal democracy, from a vibrant civil society, an arguably exemplary judiciary, an electoral process, and methods of oversight and accountability. While this is precisely the reason the U.S. has deemed to be Israel the beacon of democracy in the Middle East, it does not account for a discriminatory legal system both within the state and more glaringly in the territory it occupies. In both contexts, Israeli law, policy, and decree distinguish its population based on their religion and national origin, creating two categories, one Jews and the other non-Jews, also read as a proxy for the Palestinian indigenous population. Whereas within the state, Israel has at least 30 laws that either benefit Jews exclusively or alternatively abridge the rights of Palestinian citizens. In the occupied territory, Israel imposes a matrix of military order comprised of at least 1,500 laws that can be changed arbitrarily without review and which do not apply equally to the Jewish settler population, which benefits from the civil laws practiced by the states. For many analysts and commentators, these practices amount to apartheid per the 1973 General Assembly resolution, deeming it a crime against humanity. What are the horizons of and challenges to such a system in the context of the democratization movements we're witnessing in this Arab Spring? Today we have a distinguished panel to discuss those prospects. Mr. Jafar Farah is the director of the Mossawa Center. He will be making brief remarks, as I mentioned, followed by the rest of the panelists to answer questions. Mr. Farah is the director of the Mossawa Center, which is the Advocacy Center for Arab Citizens in Israel. He is a longtime advocate and activist for the rights of the Arab community. He currently serves on the Public Council for the Governmental Equal Opportunities Commission and was formerly the head of the National Union of Arab Students and the president of the Committee for Arab Students at Haifa University. Mr. Farah also founded CEGAS, the Center for Educational Guidance for Arab Students, and several other Arab NGOs. Prior to founding the Mossawa Center in 1997, Mr. Farah worked as a journalist for many years in the Arabic and Hebrew media. He studied sociology and education at Haifa University. Ms. Emil Asana al-Hujouj is the co-executive director of the Negev Institute for Strategies of Peace and Development and the founding director of AJIS, NISPED's Arab Jewish Center for Equality, also founded the Laqiya Women's Association and serves on the steering committee of Women's Lawyers for Human Rights. Aside from being incredibly busy, Ms. Asana al-Hujouj began her career as a community organizer at age 14 and at 17 established the first Arab Bedouin women's organization. In 2003, she won the Lady Globe's Career Woman of the Year Award, and in 2005, she was a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize within the framework of 1,000 Women Submission. Ms. Asana al-Hujouj received her BA in Social Work in Israel and her MA in Community Development from McGill University. Ms. Inat Hurwitz is an attorney and the director of the Legal and Public Policy Departments at the Israel Religious Action Center, the public and legal advocacy arm of the reform movement in Israel, where she works for egalitarian allocation for public resources, gender equality, and an end to religious discrimination. She heads such efforts as the Campaign for Civil Marriage, recognition of reform, and conservative conversion in Israel, equal allocation of resources to the Arab minority, and the battle against segregation between men and women in public spaces. Dr. Alla Shainskaya, is that right? Dr. Alla Shainskaya is the chairwoman of the board of our Heritage Charter for Democracy and member of the Bet Salem board. She is also the head of biological mass spectrometry, the mass spectrometry unit. So your bio is obviously the hardest for me to enunciate anything. At the Department of Biological Services at the Weizmann Institute of Science and Rehovot, Israel. Dr. Shainskaya emigrated from the former Soviet Union in 1990 and founded Our Heritage in 2007 with the aim of supporting the promotion of democratic, humanistic values, the spirit of tolerance and social justice among the members of the Russian-speaking community in Israel, and the advancement of their human and civil rights. Finally, Ms. Tammy Katzpian is studying and working towards an LLM degree at Yale Law School. She has already an LLM degree at from Tel Aviv University and an LLB degree from Bar Ilan University. Aside from studying, she previously worked as an attorney at the Mossawa Center, an NGO that represents minorities in Israel that face discrimination on the basis of gender, religion, nationality, and ethnicity. Ms. Katsabian also trained for a year in the law department of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, also known as ACRI, and worked as a lecturer and facilitator in ACRI's education department. She has been an active volunteer in several organizations, including Amnesty International and the Mizrahi organization Hakashet Hademokratit Hamizrahit. Hey! As well as an organizer and participant in several organizations and conferences for women in Israel. Thank you for joining us. This is a very esteemed panel. We're delighted to have you here at the center. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Farah to the microphone.
Thank you. صحتين للي بعده باكل. You have our newsletter, and it gives you a little bit of description of how we see the reality on the Middle East, and of course, Israel-Palestine is part of the Middle East, and probably most Israelis usually forget that they are part of the Middle East. So I hope that in my presentation I will try to make some kind to present some kind of overview of what are the challenges faced by the Palestinian community, but also how these challenges that are facing the Palestinian community inside Israel is impacting the region, or how is the region is impacting the Palestinian community in Israel. I would like to say, to start from the region, I think it's important not to romanticize, okay, the revolutions in the Arab region. I think it's very important to understand that the process that is taking place in the region in general is a very important process, and it's about time for people like us that are active in different human rights and democratic platforms. We dreamed for years for such a movement of revolution that will create new regimes and new systems in the region. But the risks also in this process are big risks. The Arab region have been created as a result of Sykes-Picot international agreement. It haven't been created by the nations themselves and as part of a negotiation process between the different components of the Arab region, what's so-called Arab region. In the last few years, we did our best to try to create social movement, and in several meetings with Dr. Nawal Saadawi and Sharif Hatata and other people, we invited different groups from the Arab region, what's so-called the Arab region, and we tried to call ourselves something. So we did our best to say, we, the social movement in the Arab region. So the Amazigh people raised, like we are not Arabs. And then you have the same discussion with the Sahrawi people, you have the same discussion with different groups. You can, some people would call some countries or the region, Muslim region. It's also, not all this region is Muslim region, not the whole people that are living in this region are Muslim. The Copts are 10 million people in Egypt. So it's more complicated than it has been presented to the international community. The only democracy in the Middle East, the tiny small country Israel vis-a-vis 22 Arab countries. For us Palestinians, especially Palestinians inside Israel, we always, in our views, it was clear and based on our historical experience that there is 3 roots for our tragedy. Not only the Zionist movement and the implementation of the Zionist project in establishing the State of Israel, but also the Arab leadership, that the Arab regimes that negotiated the future of the Palestinians and actually delivered big parts of Palestine to Israel as a result of an agreement, not as a result of any war. I would like here maybe to officially to refer to the Rhodes Agreement, and you have to remember this agreement because I will come back to this issue later. But the Rhodes Agreement in 49 that have been signed in 49, the Jordanians delivered the triangle area to the State of Israel as part of this agreement. The triangle area having been occupied in 48 war, it have been delivered to Israel as part of the Rhodes Agreement, with clear say and commitment that the Israeli government should protect the Palestinian community in the triangle area. The protection took place immediately in 56. The implementation was the Kufr Qasim massacre, to kill 49 civilians, farmers that came back from their work during the 56 war, using the 56 wars as an umbrella to encourage the Palestinian community in the triangle to leave their homeland. The same scenario that took place in 48, when not only the Zionist movement and the British mandate called the Palestinians to leave their homes, but also big parts of the Arab leadership and Arab armies that have been in the region in that period, the Iraqi army or the Jordanians, even in some cases, even Syrians that have been active and even the Egyptians in the south of Palestine and south, from Asdod to Gaza. So in our eyes, one core problem that we face as activists and as people that call for democracy and human rights in our region is the Arab regimes. And for us, it's an obstacle, and we have to deal with this obstacle sooner or later. And I think what is going on today may lead for democratization process or negotiation process between the different components of the Arab countries, the different Arab countries, but I am not sure that the result will be the same map that you see today. I think you have to look at Sudan and south of Sudan and the whole discussion that will take place or already is taking place in Sudan, in south of Sudan actually. Iraq, I'm not sure that after the American occupation of Iraq, Iraq will be one united Iraq. There's still national movements or ethnic movements in Iraq that will call for a different future or will act and try to create different future. Noura, how much time we have? About 15 minutes. In principle, we think that what should take place in the near future in our region is civil negotiation between different components of the Arab region, of the different Arab countries. And a country like Tunis with a strong civil society is totally, the future of Tunis look different than the situation of Libya, taking in consideration the weak civil society and also the political and ethnic groups in Libya that is looking for different solutions. I think we have to listen very careful to the voices coming from the Amazigh and from the Sahrawi people, and to see how to negotiate the future of Libya with such ethnic groups that they have also, let's say, self-determination demands. Other groups that we need to negotiate with is the army, is the whole armed forces in this region, which they have also economic interests. Egypt is one example, but it's not only Egypt. In most Arab countries, the army is very important actor to stabilize these countries, and Secret Service, of course. But the army is one component of the negotiation. we have to take in consideration that the political Islam, with all components of the political Islam groups, have different interests. There is different groups in the political Islam, and these groups have to understand that they need to negotiate with part of the secular Arabs. There is no real clear divided or clear defined secular Arab movement in the region, but we need to clarify how our countries will look like after this process, between countries that the Sharia will lead or countries that civil agreements will lead. And this process of negotiation that I think we should promote between different groups is very important to rebuild the Arab nations, to rebuild the Arab countries. And let me say, I was listening during our visit to the whole debate about the legitimacy that the American administration was looking for in intervention in Libya from the Arab League. It's wasting time. The Arab League is nothing. I think in this sense, it's very important to take in consideration that most public in the Arab region, and of course the Palestinians, have enough jokes about the Arab League, and we think that it's about time to rebuild also this Arab League in new bases, and bases that different than the ones that have been established on. Israel was very happy to abuse these revolutions, and the Israel Prime Minister called the area jungle, and that we are the only democracy in this jungle. First, let me say that we didn't choose where the Jewish people will implement their self-determination need, right. I don't know how you want to call it. They took decision to implement this self-determination right in our region and in Palestine, and it resulted in dividing us as a people. And this is the neighborhood. Maybe somebody can offer Switzerland or some other countries, but this is what was on the table in 47 in the UN, and this was the demand also. And I think somehow we have to deal with this mentality of superiority toward the region when you deal with the region as it was dealt with all over the years. We haven't been surprised with these declarations of the Prime Minister, because historically, for the last 64 years, since the establishment of the State of Israel, the mainstream in Israel was treating the region not only as a jungle, but as primitives also. So what you see today in the international arena, in sense of Islamophobia and Arabphobia, and this whole debate that is taking place in Europe today, more and more in Europe today, but also in the US, is part of the discourse that exists in Israel since the establishment of the State of Israel in the Jewish public. And it's very important to challenge this discourse, because the Jewish people have to decide if they want to live in the Middle East or if they want to move to Switzerland. And if they want to live in the Middle East, they have to find a way to contribute to the development of the Middle East economically, but also politically. And taking in consideration that 15 years ago, the EU produced this whole Barcelona process, knowing that the near neighborhood of the European Union is not only the Balkan Caucasus and not only the Russian countries and Soviet Union, but also the Mediterranean. And the whole Barcelona process, in sense of political and cultural dialogue between the EU and the Mediterranean, was very important, but in sense of security, it protected more the EU countries than the US, taking in consideration what happened in the US in September 11. And only after September 11, the American administration understood that they have to create the MEPI initiative, the Middle East Partnership, which is like cut and paste from the Barcelona process somehow. But they understood that you need to start to talk to the Mediterranean because we live in the same world, and you need to develop some kind of a dialogue with the Arab region, and you need to create civil platforms, not only military platforms for this dialogue. And we don't have this discourse in Israel. Most Israelis, if they study Arabic, I was asking some people here, why you study Mediterranean studies and Middle East? Why you study this subject? Most Israelis that will study Mediterranean or Arabic, they do it for military and security reasons. And I think you need to shift the mentality in the Jewish public, and that people will study Arabic because they're part of the region, and they should be part of this region and understand the language of the region. And actually, in this delegation, we have the group that we are coming to. We have Russian representatives of Russian organizations, but also of Mizrahi community. Mizrahi, it's Jews that immigrated from Arab countries and to Israel, and they would like to see Israel with much more culture diverse and much more visibility of the Arab identity and much more part of the Middle East than what it is. And this community is about 40% of the population in Israel, and with the Arab community, 20% of the population will be about 60% of the population. That we would like to see Israel part of the Middle East more than being isolated from the Middle East. Let me say, give you one example about the debate when we talk about part of the Middle East. When we appealed, our colleagues from Adala appealed to the Supreme Court to add Arabic to the street signs, to add the Arabic directions in Jaffa, and it took at least 7 years in the Supreme Court to debate this issue, how adding Arabic to the street signs will affect the Jewish character of the state. And in the final decision was that adding Arabic to the street signs is a service, much more than identity issue. And this Supreme Court decision started to be implemented, and later on I participated in a panel with Tzipi Livni, who was lately, when she started her political career, in one of the conferences, and she referred to this Supreme Court decision as affecting badly the Jewish character of the state. So when you talk about the character, the Jewish character of the state, you have people that think Israel should be a multicultural country. And there is groups that today, Shimon Peres, the president, is leading these groups in Israel, that think that you have to create a process of nation building and to build the Jewish people in a way that the Western European, much more than anything else, should dominate the public arena. And we need to challenge this. We need to challenge this and the isolation of the Jewish people from the Middle East by building walls around Gaza. Most people refer to the building the walls around Gaza and the West Bank as security issue. We refer to it as mentality issue, as a position that isolate, I try to create and try to help the creation of a nation, of Jewish nation. I don't think that what happened lately in the Arab region have been understood by most people in the political leadership in Israel. Because one guy that took a decision to act in Tunis created a crisis in the whole region, and suddenly you need the president of the world to take decision how to react to these realities, where to intervene, and which kind of intervention is needed by the whole international community. Which means that people have power and they can create maybe the crisis, but then you have to negotiate the future. And what was created in Tunis will affect also the situation in Israel sooner or later, because the Israelis have to understand that the Palestinians know that they have power. Now, we didn't need what happened in Tunis to know that we have power, because if you look at the Palestinian struggle for the last 64 years, it started from 48, we rebuilt our resistance to the situation that have been created only in 65. But since then, every 2 years there is a confrontation, every 2 years there is a crisis. And since then, it's clear for us at least that we don't need to wait to the youth. The youth are there all over. The first Intifada, the Lebanese war, the second intifada, and the question and the challenge that we face today, if we will lose ourselves as Palestinians, if we will lose our humanity as a result of this struggle. We have two challenges. One, to liberate ourselves and to create solution to our tragedies, but even then, even when you will have the liberation, you need to build your people on values that you believe that these are the right values to lead you to the safe side. And look at Gaza as an example, but look also at the south of Sudan as another example, and Lebanon. 30 years, almost 30 years after the liberation of Lebanon, Lebanon went to civil war, and 30 years of civil war, actually. And after 30 years, they needed to go back with international Arab intervention and international European intervention to recreate some kind of constitutional arrangement between the Lebanese themselves. It's not a perfect system. We have a lot of criticism on the system that have been created after the Lebanese civil war, but at least people now think twice before they go and take the gun and shoot each other. And it's very important for us to learn from other conflict management situations and realities. And just to look at the situation in Belgium, they lost their government almost for the last 2 years. They run the state without government and there is deep disagreements between the Flemish people and the French. Still, Belgium is not going to civil war. While Spain, the whole arrangement in Spain between the Catalans and the Basque, it's still leading to confrontations and military confrontations. The question is how we will find future vision for the Palestinian communities, hopefully that we will be one's community. Without any, I think in any scenario of political solution, the Palestinians have a responsibility to rebuild the Palestinian identity on human basis and in human values. And the challenge that we face today is the crisis that we face, the crisis in values that we face as a result of the violence. Now, I have this debate. I was the head of the Arab Students Union in the universities in the first Intifada, and the strike and the demonstrations, and we had long discussions with Faisal Hosseini in the Orient House, how we can support, as students then, the economy in East Jerusalem. And we used to rent one of the hotels in East Jerusalem and to give it to students for dormitories, because they shut it down, the whole hotels. And we had long discussions about what is the future of these kids. Faisal Husseini is not with us today, but his nightmare was that these kids that is throwing stones will become violent people back home. And we see the developments that we saw later on with the second Intifada, with the suicide bombs, is the result of the violence that have been justified by us in the first Intifada and destroyed us later on. For the last 2 days, I was so involved with the death of Julian Omer, that have been murdered in Jenin refugee camp it seems like by Palestinians. And today, the funeral just have been finished now, a few hours ago. And thousands of people went out to the streets, and thousands of Palestinians and Jews went out to the streets from Haifa to Salem, and the kids from the refugee camp in Jenin came to join Julian Omer, that he went on with the project of his mother and his father, but it was much more his father. The Freedom Theater that have been established by Arna Mer and destroyed by the Israeli occupation in 2002, have been re-established by Julian Omer and the people around him. And Julian was killed 2 days ago by people that think that culture is not what we need as Palestinians. So the challenge in liberation is not only the beauty of the liberation. The challenge is also how you will be able to build your people. And this is a big challenge that we face today in the Palestinian community in Israel, and we face it in the Palestinian, all over the region. And I think Americans face it also in the education system, as well as Europeans. Everybody needs to reevaluate the values and to educate on progressive values to be able to build and protect human beings. In any case, the other challenge when we talk about the liberation in this sense is how we will find a solution that will protect the Palestinians but also the Jews. Okay? In our project, we don't have project to throw anybody to the sea. This is not Palestinian national project, but we don't want to find ourselves in refugee camps and also in the desert, which is very important to take in consideration when it comes to the UN decisions and etc. The Palestinian challenge is to create a system that we will offer reconciliation process and not peace agreement. And there is, you need to understand that what was offered by the international community until now to the Palestinians and the Israelis was peace agreements and not peace process based on the truth. Nobody in Israel and Palestine today talk about the Nakba, about the roots of the tragedy of the Palestinians. Nobody wants to talk about the refugees. Let them disappear in Georgetown. But in any political solution that we should see in the near, short term or long term, we have to take in consideration the needs of the different components of the Palestinian people, but also of the Jewish people. And this is a big challenge, taking in consideration that there is a government today in Israel that is promoting separation and promoting isolation and promoting population transfer. It was very sad for people like us to see that the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Avigdor Lieberman, was promoting population transfer in the floor of the UN, where human rights should be protected. But for us, the UN today is much more where the international community can make business than protect humanity. And we have to challenge this system also, and to remind the people that are leading the UN instruments today, the UN institutions today, that the UN have been created after the Second World War and after the crisis, the biggest crisis in humanity that took place in the Second World War, and to sacrifice the Palestinian community, like here and there, and to sacrifice the Sahrawi people rights and South Americans here and there, means that you create crises all over these areas, and then these crises will be abused by different actors. The abuse of the Palestinian tragedy by Ahmadinejad from one side or Al-Qaeda from the other side is done without asking us as a Palestinian. We didn't implement the Holocaust to deny the Holocaust. We don't have any reason to deny the Holocaust. Actually, we are paying the price of the Holocaust. We don't have any reason to deny the Holocaust, and Ahmadinejad is denying and abusing the Palestinian issue and denying the Holocaust not on our behalf. And attacking the US in September 11 was done, and abusing the Palestinian issue, and it wasn't done on our behalf. It's not part of the solidarity that we expect from the international community to end our tragedy. And I have to say, we want to struggle. We want to struggle for liberation, but we don't want to struggle for the last Palestinian. We want to struggle and live. We have project of life and not project of death. So the challenges that we face today is discriminatory legislation. Noura just mentioned the 30 laws. We have another 25 in the pipeline. Social economic discrimination. But as you probably noticed, we didn't give up. We will create sooner or later a new political system in this region. And we hope that we can get your help. That's why we came here. Not only to educate you or to give you to share with you some of the knowledge that we have, but we think that people like you can show solidarity with other nations, and they can help in building better future for all of us, because what's happening in Japan today is impacting the Americans and the Canadians and the Chinese, and we have to take in consideration that the tragedy, the ongoing tragedy of the Palestinian people for the last 64 years have to be solved, and what is promoted today in Israel in sense of legislation to prevent us to talk about our history, about the Nakba. You know, Arab education system and local councils can't talk about the Nakba according to the new law that was approved just last week. In the only democracy in the Middle East, of course, somebody think and approve legislation that prevent you from commemorating your tragedy. This is the reality today, but we will commemorate our tragedy, and some of us maybe will be jailed because of that, but these are the challenges that people should take and need to take to change the reality and to change oppression policies. And we will not be the first ones, but we don't want to be the ones that after the liberation, we will oppress women's rights, for example, or we will oppress different groups in our communities. So the liberation that we look for should be best. It can be best in one-state solution or two-state solution. We can live with both of them. We can live with both of them. We know Hebrew, Arabic, and we can live with the Jewish population and with the Palestinians. The decision that have to be taken is by the Jewish population in Israel. And if something that I would call to do is to call the American administration to call the Israelis before September, before the UN discussion on the recognition of Palestine, to call the Israeli public to decide they want to live in one-state solution or two-state solution. They have to decide. This is their decision, much more than our decision or the international community decision. They have to decide in one-state solution, like the one that is implemented today. You can't occupy people and control them in the way that the Palestinians are controlled with checkpoints. Everybody should live in equal basis. Noura, tell me, khalas. I have a small dream, Noura. A small one. No. To live like Belgium. Maybe in one-state solution, if they want one-state solution, we can find compromise, similar to the one that have been created in Belgium, between the Flemish and the Germans, actually, also. There is very small minority in Germany that is well protected. But I think what we need today to make sure that should happen locally in Israel and Palestine and by the international community to hold the Israelis responsible to their future. We don't want anybody to be pro-Palestinian. But if the future of the Jewish people in the Middle East, they have to give a little bit of respect to this region, to the Palestinian neighbors. And if the 6 million Jews living in Israel will succeed to live in coexistence with the 1.5 million Arabs that live inside the state of Israel, then there will be better chances that we will have coexistence between the 6 million Jews and 400 million Arabs that live in this region. So thank you for hosting us again. We will be happy to, each one of us is doing a lot on his field or in her field, mostly in her field. So we will be here for the next, how much? 40 minutes, and we'll be happy to discuss with you different issues that reflect the reality that we will live with and you want to change or you want to study, learn. So thank you.
So we'll be conducting the Q&A seated, and we will be taking questions. But before we start, before I open up the floor to everybody else, I wanted to pose a question to Jafar as well as the other panelists, just to kind of get us started. There seemed to be this theme running through your discussion about Israel being part and parcel of the Middle East, taking responsibility as a people of one of many, many people. And so I wonder, for those in the panel who defend Mizrahi rights, Russian rights, women's rights, the rights of the Bedouin and the Naqab, the rights of Palestinian citizens. We have these many different groups. And the question I have is how much of this minority identity is a collective minority identity, and how much of it is in fact fragmented. And a case in point would be perhaps not a collective response to the recent Nakba law, which has outlawed discussion and commemoration of the Nakba, which affects maybe one community. Do other communities feel like this can affect them as well? And perhaps more specifically or appropriately is it's called the Admission Committee Law. And the Admission Committee Law, for those who don't know, is a law that was passed recently that gave rights to small communities to decide what kind of community they wanted to exist in, which is basically proxy to exclude those Palestinians or undesirables, whether they be the LGBTQ community or Bedouins and what have you. That it basically privatizes the right to democratize and takes it out of the hands of the state. So how have your different communities envisioned themselves as a collective minority one to respond to these challenges, or how have you not?
I think there is, regarding the Mizrahis community, I think there is a very clear direct connection between the Mizrahi community. The Mizrahi communities are Jewish people that came not only to Israel, but Jewish people who are originally from Muslim countries or Arab countries. So they have this kind of inner struggle between the Jewish identity, which it was supposed to be a Western one, and the Arabic and Muslim identity. And I think in a sense, I want to return back to history and then I return to your question. The Palestinian Arab strategy is very similar to the Mizrahi one, because when we return back to what happened in the 50s, when the Zionist movement came to Israel, they originally wanted to create a Western country. They wanted to create a European country within the Middle East, which is totally not related to what happened, was to the countries that surrounded them, but it also was not related to the inner Palestinian population and as well the Mizrahi population that were also in Israel or were immigrating to Israel in that time. And part of our vision as Mizrahis in Israel, with political awareness of, unfortunately, it's not a vision of all the Mizrahis in Israel, is to return back to this Middle Eastern vision, okay, to be part of the Middle East, a real part of it. And it's related to so many things. You're talking about the admission committee. Admission committee, just like nightclubs, just like places of work, just like all kinds of segregation within the education, are segregative, and they are discriminate not only Palestinians, but they only segregate and discriminate Mizrahi people. And it comes from the same sources, the same stereotype about the Arab, whether if he's a Jew or she's a Jew Arab, or whether it's a Muslim Arab or a Christian Arab, as being barbaric, as being uneducated, as being without a culture, as being violent regarding nightclubs. So it's returned back to the same sources, and in this sense we can see that it's part of the same struggle to create even a positive, I think, a positive image of the Middle East, of Israel as a Middle East country, and as a positive image of Arabs, whether if they're Jewish or Muslim or Christians. And I think that, I mean, the struggle is so much more behind it. I mean, it's not only economical struggle, it's not only a social struggle about our places and our positions in education, or in schools or in specific places that we are excluded from, but also about our culture and about our language. And I think it's also part of the Israeli Jewish Mizrahi strategy today, that I'm as a Mizrahi girl I was studied in Israeli Jewish education system. I don't know much about my own legacy. My parents immigrated from Iran to Israel. I don't know much about the Iranians and their history and what happened even to the Jewish back in Iran before 79. I know a lot about what happened to Jewish people and what happened all around the world, the Western world, the European world, but I don't know about my own history and my own legacy. The language is not, I mean, the language, the Arabic language, is very relevant to Palestinians that they need to find themselves, but it's also relevant to Mizrahi people. A lot of, especially the first generation of Mizrahi people who came to Israel, they also use this language as part of their identity, and they need it in the same way. And we can continue talking about music and about budget to music, what is considered to be a high music, what is not considered high music. It's all part of the same struggle. So I think there is a very clear connection between the Mizrahi struggle and the Palestinian struggle in this sense, both in the cultural perspective of it and the economical, social perspective of it. And from there, we don't want to be particular, right? We want to be universal in our view. From this particular understanding of our own culture and the connection between the two cultures, we can be more universal and include other cultures like the Russian one, which is also excluded, even though it's different culture and doesn't have the same origin in its history. It should gain and have the same place within the Israeli society. So it's a vision of a new, I don't know, it will be the Israeli state, but a new state which is part of the Middle East, and it's multicultural, and it's include all the diverse group that he has within it and not exclude them.
So it's a great vision. If the other panelists want to respond before we open up the floor. Use that. Well, it's being recorded. It goes off. I have a strong voice, so believe me. But I want to stand because I want to see everyone here, okay? So it's Okay, so again, my name is Emil Asana, and I'm here also to part of what I'm doing is to represent the Palestinian Bedouin population in the southern area of Israel, which is one of the communities that for many years was excluded, not only from the Israeli political and economic and social system, but also was excluded from the language and speech of the Palestinian community all over. And this is part of how the Israeli institutions succeeded actually in separate and control. When they said, here we are, these are Bedouins, these are Druze, these are Arabs from the north, and these and these, and they succeeded, because when you are talking about the Arab Bedouin population, it's really one of the challenges is the identity challenge that we are facing as a group living in the Naqab area. So when we are talking about the Bedouin community, the Palestinian Bedouin community, we are talking about the most disadvantaged community in Israel. And if you want to see what's the meaning of democracy, okay, you have to come, exactly, according to Gaddafi, you have to come to the Naqab area and see where we're talking about 82,000 people living without running water and electricity, and a right to have an address even. If you look at the map, and you are all invited to look at the map of Israel and look at the southern area, you won't see Khashem Zanne, you won't see Al-Araqib, you won't see Bir al-Hamam, you won't see Awajan, you won't see Zarnoug. All these villages exist before the state of Israel was established, but all these villages are not recognized by the Israeli government. And part of how this issue was born is the late 60s, when the government of Israel decided to settle the Bedouin community into 7 planned towns, and the approach was and is still to bring maximum Bedouin and minimum land. And this is also, I think, the approach in Jalil and the other areas. So I am sure that you heard about Al-Araqib issue. Al-Araqib, the village that was destroyed now for the 23 times since last July. It's actually every 2 times a week, or every week they destroy the village. It's not about Al-Araqib only. It's about the existence of the people on their lands. It's not only about Al-Araqib, it's also about the 45 unrecognized villages that people are fighting and struggling for recognition and for an address and for being there and for their ownership on their land. So it's, if we lose the issue of Al-Araqib, if we lose the case of Al-Araqib, that will be a tragedy, because then we're gonna lose the issue of the 44 unrecognized villages. Most of the Arab Bedouin population don't have any documentations that can prove that this land belonged to them, because we used to have, it's also my
my father issue, we used to have an oral history and oral agreements that this is your land, this is my land. In the Israeli court, it doesn't work. If you don't have documentations and written documentations, you lose. And in 1952, when the Israeli government kicked the Arab Bedouin population and from the area, western of Bir al-Saba area, and they said, in 6 months, we will bring you back. 1953, the Israeli government did the legislation on the land, and they said, well, this land now is empty, so this land will become the state's land. So according to the law, no one can win this situation and prove his ownership on land. It's very important to present the case, but it's very important that you all can bring the voice of Al-Aragib and the voice of the unrecognized villages, because we are part of the Palestinian community. Just to mention that the last survey that we had among the youth in the Naqab area, 72% first of all said, we are Palestinians, and then we are Arabs, and then we are Israeli citizens. So despite the fact that Ben Gurion said that the first people who will forget that they are Palestinians will be the Bedouins, so we also show Ben Gurion and his vision that also he is a big failure in that area. So please bring the message to everyone, and people in the Naqab area deserve to develop their own lives. People are very strong. They see themselves as part of the solutions. Women are very active in the Naqab area. So please come when you have time to do volunteer activities. Please come to the Naqab area, to the unrecognized villages, work with the kids in the formal and non-formal education, with women organization. We will host you. We will take care of you. We're also very good in hospitality, so it's part of our culture. Please take that message with you. Thank you very much. And you can stay for more than 3 days and a half. This is the conditions, actually. Now the Jews are fighting who's gonna... They're not fighting. The opposite of fighting. Welcoming each other.
Hi. Thank you very much for hosting us, and it's a pleasure to be here for me today. I have few hats on my head, very heavy. So one is a peace activist, and another one is a part of Russian-speaking community. And I will stay maybe on the second one, because Jafar, I think, gave a very nice introduction on the situation in the region and also our aspirations to peace in Israel, some of. By the way, what I wanted to tell and to ask you, Jafar, if you heard that at the beginning of perestroika and in the eve of collapse of former Soviet Union in '88, Arafat went to Moscow and asked Gorbachev to prevent Jews of coming, Russian Jews. Did you hear about this? No, I'm not joking, because these are very recent Russian archive disclosure. I didn't know about this.
You know, like taking into consideration that political positions that this community hold, I understand.
You understand? I was amused really to hear about this. Yeah, but the Gorbachev, of course, said that he couldn't stop this process. But yeah. Yeah, okay. What I can tell you that really the collapse of former Soviet Union, which some of the former citizens of big Soviet Union consider as being the biggest geopolitical catastrophe, but some of them consider others. Of course, we are for pluralistic views. Brought to Israel the big wave of immigrant from former Soviet Union, and during, I think, something like maybe 10 years, it was, of course, the biggest amount came starting at the end of '89, and then even during the war in the Gulf and later on. And now it's something 1,300,000 citizens just came from former Soviet Union. Now 300 300,000 people from this community are considered to be not Jews according to Galakha. There is some controversy, I would say, in the behavior of this community. First of all, we are really talking about community because they are populated in big areas, they're concentrated, they are not spread over the country. Of course, some of them are, but there are very populated areas and towns in the south of the country and also in the north of the country. And I think that the shared problem this community has with Arab community is the problem with jobs and with also they suffer from some discrimination in job opportunity and working opportunity. And if you look at, for example, people who work in security in Israel just to secure shops and restaurants and I don't know in big shopping malls and everywhere in the country, most of them are people, Russian immigrants. And if you see also lots of cleaning people the street, still now there are many retired people, old people who didn't find themselves in the market of job market in Israel. From another side, we have lots of success of accommodation of immigrants in Israeli society, like physicians and scientists, some of them, and also musicians, and we have a theater, although they started on Russian to perform in Russian language and now they switch on to Hebrew, but this is an achievement, 20 years of theater, with most of them Russian actors. But the problem, this society, this community, I think, suffer shared with other minorities. It's that they are the most populated area where they live. It's the area of peripheric area. So this is south and the north. So they suffer. The level of the schools is much lower. And if you consider that people who came with from former Soviet Union, they came with very good and very high level of education. Now the kids, there are kids who are actually now in the schools with much lower level of education than in the center of the country. They suffer from this. So many of them don't get to finish the school. There is also quite I think, a level of crime among like Mizrahi, and also, of course, much lower than Arab community, but much higher than we would have liked to have it for immigrants from Russian community. And all this, I think, and another thing which I forgot just to mention, that services, just absolutely normal services provided by governments or state in other places, in other states, are not provided for these people. For 300,000 people, they cannot be married because there is no civil marriage in the state in Israel. There is no civil divorce in Israel, of course, and even there should be a particular place to build these people if they are not if they are not Jews. So there are quite a number of problems, and therefore we are here in this coalition also. And there is, of course, Lieberman influence, which we would like to fight, and therefore we are in this coalition.
Great. So we'll pass the mic to Ms. Inat before we open to the floor.
So I noticed that we don't have that much time left, so I'll be very brief. I really just wanted to emphasize that all of us sitting in this delegation together, we're part of an ongoing coalition in Israel, fighting together racism and fighting the inequalities that Israeli institutions inflict or uphold. And what I want to reflect to you is that there is, in the politics in Israel, there is a tendency to present the problems as, a zero-sum game. That if the Arab population would receive more rights, it would harm the Jewish population. That if the Arab minority will be recognized as a national minority, as indigenous people, it would somehow diminish the rights of the Jews in the country, or that if migrant workers will receive their rights in Israel, it will harm the Mizrahi population, who are, for the most part, when you look at social-economic relations, the poor neighborhoods and towns are either Arab or ultra-Orthodox or Mizrahi. And so there are all these voices calling for division, calling for segregation, calling for discrimination of the other, because that way your position will be better. And what we're trying to do is, through our anti-racism work and also through our work to present a new social contract for Israel, for the people who live in Israel, we want to prove and to impose on Israeli politicians that there is a way for Jews and Arabs, men, women, Mizrahi, Ashkenazi, all the different groups in Israel to find new systems of government or agreements about social issues, etc., that will serve the needs, the real needs of everyone. It's not just a utopian talk. We think that in many ways we agree on many things that relate to, especially the social status and social arrangements in the country. And we will also have disagreements relating to the symbols of the state, or maybe the definition of the state. But first of all, we think we really have to address these issues. You cannot just leave them to extremists and to racist people. We need to address them between ourselves. And second of all, I believe that we can reach compromises also on these issues. And the final thing is that we really need to move on from this politics of division and separation and segregation and discrimination. And if we as civil society organizations don't present an option how it could be otherwise, then we have that's our role. We can't leave the politics of the politicians because they're just really bad at it.
With that, let's open up the floor. Whoever's going to ask a question, if you can just please speak into the mic. We'll take a round of questions, and if we have time, hopefully we'll take 2 rounds. We have about 15 minutes left. So if you can just, who has a question?
I do.
I know you do. I'm looking at somebody else. Okay.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, shlonakon. Ismi Mike Springman. Andi Sual. And I'm going to start with English because my Arabic ain't that good. How much prospect is there for change in the region, given that the United States government is Israeli-occupied territory, just like Mandate Palestine? The United States supports Israel. It supported its terrorist attack on the Gaza aid convoy. It supported the blinding of the girl in Chevy Chase. It supported the murder of Rachel Corrie. If there really is ferment and change and pressure for a one-state solution, will the United States permit that to happen? Or will the United States back Israel to the hilt, as it's done for the last 60 years?
Okay, so there's a question in the back. We'll take 3 questions and then give it to our panelists. Go ahead.
Hi. So I guess I just had a question about all of these civil rights advocacy groups for Arab rights in Israel. I'm trying to figure out how to make my question concise. How do you see, because I think someone mentioned that that we are okay with a 2-state solution or a 1-state solution, anything but to work within the system to make sure that Palestinians have equal rights. And so I guess my question is just that, how do you see the differing, because for example, there's some killing of Giuliano by Palestinians and all these different situations where you see such a factionalized Palestinian population, like how do you see the people coming together to figure out like an agenda that really gives them the rights that they need when there's so much difference between like what people want and what people are willing to accept as well, like if they're willing to accept some concessions, because I think a lot of the issues that occur are based on an inability for people to come to a consensus on what they think they can, or like the negotiation that you're talking about. How do you see that playing out, I guess?
Are there any other questions? Okay, so can you pass them away? And then we'll come back to you in a second round here.
I'll try to make it brief. Actually, I hope I'm not the only one here that believe that Arabs or Palestinians in Israel live in a colonial situation. I'm a big fan of shared and common struggle, but I'm afraid this is quite misleading, because if the Russian and Mizrahi struggle is basically a socio-economic struggle, our struggle as Palestinian with Israel is over our existence, over land. There is a process of internal colonialism, settlement in Jaffa, the Judaization of the Galilee, Jaffa, we see it in Al-Naqab, we see it everywhere. So basically, our struggle is quite different, and so this symmetry, I'm afraid that this symmetry would let us forget that our real struggle is really much deeper, more historical, and it's one of liberation. I see it one of liberation more than the social or civil right. I like the discourse of civil rights. I mean, I don't know who brought it in Palestine. I mean, but yeah, it's not accurate in the case of Palestinian in Israel to focus only on civil rights. But we know about programs of transfer. There are silent or steady disposition going on in Israel. We hear about that. You know, Lieberman talks about that very freely. I mean, very explicitly. So it's nice. I mean, this shared struggle, common struggle. But let's not forget that our struggle is really different. And this gives us.
Thank you. So can we get this mic? Well, who in the panel would like to answer those three questions? One, maybe different questions, if you want to take.
أنا بجاوب الأخير، أوكي؟
جاوب ايش بدك؟
يا كفر برا. بدي أجاوبك. Okay. When we are talking about the shared future, nobody is like, even in our assumption, is saying that this is the same challenge. It's not the same challenge. We are all aware of the struggles and the challenges that the Arab Palestinian, the national minority in Israel is facing, and we all aware of the levels of the discriminations that the Jewish community is facing based on other ethnicity and differences. We all aware, we are not asking for symmetry between the group. We want us and the Palestinian group within that big group of the shared future to discuss deeply the issues of the Palestinian community and to bring together with us, because for many years we were talking with the left wing. For many years as Palestinians inside Israel, we are talking with the left wing, and we see that the left wing is always a very excluded from the discourse, and we want the people, the different groups from Israel, to bring also our voices, the Palestinian voice inside the mainstream of the Israeli community, whether it's the Mizrahi or the Reform movement or the Russian community. This is not about that we are going together to fight for equal rights among ourselves. It's not all about that. So it's very important that we clarify this point.
Look, let me say that activism is the way to be active citizen is the way to change the reality. If you wait in your village to 5 people to come and shoot somebody, this is what's going on and taking over. It can be Chicago and it can be Jenin refugee camp. In the end of the day, the Jenin refugee camp, you know, to isolate Gaza is not only about Israel. It's mainly about Israel. but it's also if we are able to outreach and to build coalitions with the flotilla, with the people in Turkey and other people in all over the world, and build solidarity. If we are not able to show any solidarity with the Chilean people, for example, so why the Chilean people should show any solidarity with us? When we talk about rebuilding ourselves, we need to build the institutions. And I call you here also, the people that want to be active also here. Don't sit in Georgetown, and you're sitting in Washington, and as students, you know, I remember myself, I was arrested when I was 18 years old, but like, I never learned the lesson. So I kept being active, and I'm arrested less now. But I believe that we can make, you know, like my brother was jailed when he was 18 years old because he was putting Palestinian flag in Haifa. 3 years later, in '89, when Yasser Arafat declared Palestinian state in Algiers. And in '93, when we came and the Palestinian flag became legal, we said, yeah, okay, that's it, خلاص, forget, it's over. So people don't know to measure also success. You have to measure success. No, we are not the same Palestinians of 70s and 60s. And we have to be clear also when we make the analysis of what are the obstacles for for ourselves. We have to take in consideration that the Arab regimes were part of the obstacles. I'm not sure that after the revolution we'll get better regimes. But in any case, my dream was ever that I don't want to see these 22 Arab leaders sitting in the Arab League together. And when we talk about the challenges that face the Palestinian community, look, Inat will not help me in anything in dealing with the killers of Giuliano. Okay, my national demands as a Palestinian is, why you put demands? You put demands to convince somebody else. If you want to convince yourself, so you don't need to put demands. You sit in your club and you say, we want this and that. We put demands, and we have struggled to convince the Jewish majority in our national issues. This is the biggest challenge of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. When he was jailed, he was sitting in the jail, outreaching to the white South Africans, telling them, look, this is the way to create a new country that everybody will be protected. So I don't think that when we fight for our linguistic rights, for example, I should disqualify or reject Russian immigrants from using their language. And we should not sacrifice women's rights, for example, because we have national rights. And this is the case in Algiers. This is the case in other places that women's rights have been sacrificed. So I'm not sure that when we talk about collective rights, it's only either collective rights or civil rights. Women's rights is collective, but still considered much more civil than collective when we talk about this liberal debate about rights. So I think we have to see how our issues are complicated, and to build strategies, and to, you know what, maybe our way to struggle is not the best way, but we have to start to, you know, this is referring to your question. Think what is the best effective way, make work plan and go and do it. You know, like maybe you will make mistakes in the way. The disaster that we face, that we undermine each other. You know, we say this is traitor, هذا عميل وهذا هيك وهذا هيك، ونبلش نوزع شهايد وطنية. We stop helping each other to look, maybe there is better way to do things. So, you know, like learning from the South Africans, Nelson Mandela wasn't the only leader of the South African Revolution. The whole leaders of the South African Revolution took a decision to focus in Nelson Mandela and to make a hero of the people. And when they win, he just went home. He said, خلاص. Not like some of our leaders.
We are at time, but it seems that people are sitting at the edge of their seats. It might also be the seating arrangement. But maybe we'll take a couple more questions and close. I know that this gentleman over here had a question, so
the question is, like you were asking the Americans.
Yeah, do you believe the Americans will permit change, real change in mandate Palestine?
Look, we believe we believe that all human beings can do something, even Americans. Okay?
Go ahead.
We need you to believe that. You know, like more than us. You know, we came here, we left our families to come and to talk to you. It wasn't easy days for us to be here, but we expect you to write your member of the Congress about the issues that we deal with. We expect you to do something, and you know, to tell us that it's colonialistic situation. We know that for the last 60 years. We were struggling against colonialism. My parents, my grandfather did that against the British. So it's not enough. We need you to do something to change the reality in the US. If you believe that it should be changed, do something systematic to make sure that we will have people here that will support human rights in our region.
My question goes back to the politicians that are probably not worth talking about, but in the sense that they are the ones that are making the problematic decisions in the first place. I spent half a year studying abroad in Ben Gurion. I actually spent half my time in Rahat though doing research. So and being there during the elections really got me thinking about a lot of these different issues. And I think for most Jewish Israelis, when they look at the Knesset and they see the Arab representation that's there, scared would be a euphemism for how they feel about how extremist the Israelis perceive the Arab politicians. So my question to the Arab members of the panel: do you think that the politicians that are representing your communities in the Knesset now are doing a good job? And if not, where is this new generation of leadership supposed to be coming from? Because I think there's a sort of a disconnect between the typical Palestinian in Israel compared to what you see sometimes. Who's representing them necessarily, holding the microphone on the media, on, you know, or whatever it is. So, thank you.
Any other questions? We'll take one more.
Last call.
That's it. It's gone. Okay. To the Arabs. Do you feel represented in this? And can I supplement your question by adding, because there's also a youth movement that's now calling for a resuscitation of the Palestinian National Council to include Palestinians in diaspora. Not only are you being represented maybe by, if I have the liberty to add to your question, are you being represented by members of the Knesset, but do you feel that there's a Palestinian leadership that can represent you also as a Palestinian national body? Sorry, I had to.
They call it parliament.
They call it parliament?
In Ramallah, they call it parliament. Believe it or not.
First of all, you know what? It's always when I'm having interviews in the TV or the radio by Jewish journalists, they would say to me directly, "What do you think about your Knesset members? They are not doing the good job. They are only fighting for the Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank and not for you." Okay. But not everything has to be done by the Knesset member and the Arab Knesset member, and they are for many years, and every time were they in the opposition, and they never were in the coalition to affect the decision-making cycle. Now, the other half of it is that, yes, I am able, I am ready, I am eager to also criticize my own leaders when they are not having really a plan to do what they have to do for their communities. That's right. But what's going on in the media is that the propaganda against the Knesset members, the Arab Knesset member, is really very strong and huge. And they want to make us not believing and trust our leaders. Tomorrow, I will be a Knesset member, hopefully, maybe. I will be a Knesset member. And then they will say to Jafar Farah, she's not representing you. This is part of the game. This is part of what we are facing. When everyone who wants to do something, always they will focus on him and criticize him. That's okay, but not to lead us towards that place. We are able to criticize ourselves. Me and Jafar, I think, always we are talking in a very, very strong way and direct way to our Knesset member. My uncle is a Knesset member. Always, if he meets with me, he every time would feel that, oh my God, I want to escape from this place. Because I'm always opening my mouth towards him and telling him what's wrong, what he's doing in a wrong way. So we have to put things in the right proportion. The other thing is that I was in a meeting in Geneva with Palestinian leaders thinking about the future of Palestinian peoplehood. And I'm telling you, we were 3 people from the Palestinian inside Israel, and every time we gave lectures, and we were very strong, and our voices were very heard there. But every time where the Palestinian finished with the lectures about the Palestinian inside Israel, they would continue talking West Bank, Gaza, West Bank, and Gaza. We are there to tell them that we are part of the Palestinian peoplehood. So yes, we want to be part of the strategic plan for Palestinian nation, Palestinian peoplehood. We are part of the Palestinian community. We want to be there to also to think about what are the strategies, what are the solutions. We want to be part because we are part. We are not the people who forgot. We are the people that stayed on their lands. Because we stayed on our lands for many years, they were treated as traitors. We are Israelis, but we are the people who stayed on their lands, okay? So it's very important that everyone in the Palestinian community, the leaders, understand that we are part of the Palestinian community, the Palestinian nation, and the Palestinian peoplehood. And yes, we see ourselves in every project that deals with the Palestinian as a nation, as a peoplehood.
I don't see myself as part of the national authority, شو اسمها السلطة الوطنية. I don't see myself as part of the national authority establishment. I think to run big jail called Palestinian Authority is a mistake. This is what was offered, but we don't have to promote this illusion, okay? To run and to fight over who will run the big jail called Gaza. This is disaster when you get oppressed people to a situation that they adopt the oppression and they start to use to oppress somebody else. Look, we are not unique in this. You can see it today in Africa, you can see it in South America and different places. This is not unique struggle. People think that this is, you know about it because the Americans are more involved in it because of AIPAC mainly. But this is not the biggest crisis that exists all over the world. We want to solve it. My leaders is the one that I elect, and usually people go and elect one party, and in the next election they may change their mind and elect another party. There's nothing like this, the Arab leaders in the Knesset. You know, the Arab leaders represent Islamic movement, Communist Party, but when you want to delegitimize leadership, and this is something that is done in third world countries by many people, you know, you either corrupt them, you know, pay them through NGOs, money and things like that, or say they don't represent. People go and elect. In every election, this is the leadership that have been elected. And you know what? In the last 15 years in Israel, one prime minister was shooted and killed by Jewish citizen. Other one is in a coma. Third one is in his way to the jail. President in his way into the jail. Minister of Finance is in the jail. Minister that promoted the wall was busy in kissing a soldier in his way to take a decision to send people to fight in a war. And name it, you know, I can give you a list of at least 20 political leaders in Israel that are corrupted. There is no one Arab leader of the Arab community that have been accused in corruption. All of them have been accused on political issues. But still, if you go to the public, the Arab leaders don't present. Who present? Makatsav, the one that raped five ladies in his office. He represents the Jewish public. And I never ask the Jewish public, you know, this question. Because I don't treat, you know, people vote for parties. You vote for Republicans or for Democrats. And then you change it because you don't like it, like you're a member of the Congress. So, but the main thing that you have to think about it, there is no community without leadership. There is no university without leadership. There is no class without leadership. Every community has a leadership. If you undermine the community leadership, you may lose this community. You may win time. But sooner or later, you need to talk to the leaders of this community. This is what's happening. Israel said, there is no PLO. We don't want to talk to the PLO. In Madrid negotiation, they invited people to talk to in Madrid. They were all of them PLO people. But they said, no, there is no PLO. They refused to talk to the PLO. Later on, they started to talk to the PLO. Now we don't like Arafat. You know, so like to always to negotiate whom you will to choose the leaders of your enemy is something that have been done all over the history. I think, you know, and somehow it's preventing us from criticizing our leaders and changing them. This whole delegitimization process put us in a situation that we need to protect them because we know that this is part of this colonialistic mentality to control people without that, you know, there is nothing like this, you know, in the jail, the criminals have leaders. Everywhere in the hospital you find leaders. Leaders exist. You change them, you give them more power, less power. And I promise you, if you learn more and more about Tahrir Square, look, it was few leaders in Facebook, and they called millions, and millions went out, and they were females and men, and they went out and they did the revolution. Can they be the next generation of leadership? I'm not sure. Maybe some people will tell they are not representatives of the Tahrir Square. They're already saying this. It's not a joke. They're already now, the army and the political leaders of the political Islam and some of the left parties and the governmental administration in saying these young guys that led this revolution are not representatives of the people because they are, yes, they are not, because they haven't been elected, but they led this revolution and now they are excluded from the next stage of negotiating the future.
Please join me in giving this panel a warm round of applause.